Hi, GB News presenter Arlene Foster. Arlene, I want to talk to you about Brexit in a moment, but first, on this list, the government have completely lost control of migration, haven't they? 745,000 in the last year, but that's the net figure.
Yeah.
The gross figure was well over 1 million.
Yeah. And Robert Jenrick acknowledged yesterday in the Commons that it was having a huge impact on public services, and I think that's why you get the anger in so many places, because people cannot get to see their GPs. They don't want to see them over the phone. They want to go in and see their GP. And we heard earlier on that it was having an impact, people only getting telephone calls with their GP. Of course that's going to misdiagnose people. Of course it is, and it's self-evident. But in terms of the migration shortage list that you've been talking about this morning, that's set by an independent group of people. And the difficulty with the list is it keeps getting added to, and nothing gets taken away from it. So you've read out this morning a list, artists, all jobs. I mean, what does that mean?
I know.
I mean, I could call myself an artist.
Yeah, quite.
You could call yourself an artist.
I mean,
who decided? Yeah, I would be a very bad one as well. And so there's a huge list here. I am not saying that there are some on this list that need to be there. The whole point about Brexit was not to stop migration, but to control it. And at the moment, that's not happening. And you can see what's going on in the Conservative Party, and the Labour Party are taking advantage of that, obviously.
You mentioned Brexit. Interesting intervention overnight from Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary. She says the government has to reopen the Windsor Framework. Now, that was the deal that Rishi Sunak did to effectively, he said, solve the Northern Ireland problem. You're the former Northern Ireland Minister. Effectively, the Windsor Framework still keeps Northern Ireland under the control of the European Union.
Yes, so viewers and listeners will remember we had the protocol first of all. The Windsor Framework was meant to come along and deal with the difficulties that the protocol had caused between GB and Northern Ireland. So goods coming from GB into Northern Ireland were being checked. And we're supposed to be in an internal market of the United Kingdom according to the Acts of Union. So there was great concern around that. As you know, the Northern Ireland Executive hasn't been sitting since last February as a result of that. And so the Windsor Framework was meant to deal with that. But unfortunately, we're told by Enterprise NI, which represents small businesses in Northern Ireland, that 71% of those businesses have had difficulties bringing goods from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. Now, that's a scandal, and it needs to be dealt with.
And Northern Ireland is being treated differently to the rest of the United Kingdom.
Yes, it is.
Because it adjoins Ireland, which is still in the European Union.
Yes, and of course that could have been dealt with, and Priti Patel says this in her piece, which she published overnight. It could have been dealt with very easily through alternative arrangements, through intelligence, through trusted traders being set in place, but instead the Government of Ireland and indeed the European Union used Northern Ireland basically as a weapon against the UK for having the temerity to leave the European Union. And we in Northern Ireland are suffering as a result of that.
How furious are people in Northern Ireland that you are being treated, in a sense, you could say, second-class citizens?
Well, people get very annoyed when they try to order something from Great Britain, as they do online, and they're told, no, we don't deliver to Northern Ireland. They get very upset, and coming up to Christmas, it happens more and more.
And what sort of products are they?
A whole range of products, because a lot of people in Great Britain, if they're a small business in Great Britain, cannot be bothered with the paperwork that's needed to send stuff to Northern Ireland. So although they could send it, they think, no, I'm not bothering about that. I can't. It's taking up too much of my time. I would have to employ somebody to do the paperwork. Why would you do that? So they're just themselves stopping delivering to Northern Ireland, and that's a real problem.
But we all remember Rishi Sunak sort of hailing this as a triumph, don't we? I mean, walking down and saying, well, I've solved the Northern Ireland Brexit.
He totally oversold it, Bev. I mean, I think there were improvements under the Windsor Framework, but to sell it as the greatest thing, as we would say at home, since sliced bread, was the wrong thing to do, because Northern Ireland people just looked at it and went, sorry, no, it's not the greatest thing. So why are you doing this?
And we're still under the control of the European Union, and we've still got the trading problems. By overselling it in that way, it rather challenges his integrity.
Well, I think it's a real problem, and I said it at the time. If he had come over and said, look, this is as far as I've been able to get with the European Union. I know it's not perfect, but it's an improvement. I think people would have said, We recognise that. Thank you. Can we keep trying now to do this? But instead, he tried to sell it as something it wasn't. And I think that's a real problem. And it's interesting, isn't it, that Pretty is saying now, to be fair, she voted against the Windsor Framework when it was in the House of Commons. So she's being consistent in relation to that. And she's basically saying, look, we thought the protocol was temporary. We were told it was temporary when we voted for it. And now we need to step up and protect the internal market of the United Kingdom.
And she uses a very interesting expression, the government has got to act over the tentacles of the EU.
Yes.
Tentacles. That's a very, very emotive expression, isn't it?
But there is a democratic deficit, of course, in Northern Ireland because we have to take EU rules and regulations.
Yeah.
But there's no democratic accountability for those rules. We don't have MEPs, we want MEPs, but they're making the rules that apply to us in Northern Ireland.
Let me just ask you, we had these awful figures, as we just said this last week, about these record migration figures. Is Keir Starmer remotely landing a punch on the Conservative Party at an opportunity like that?
Well, you know, one of the great joys about being in opposition is that you can say, if we were in power, we would do X, Y and Z. And I listened to Yvette Cooper yesterday saying she would cut migration, and you go, well, how are you going to do that, Yvette? How are you going to do that? Is it going to be by getting rid of the shortage occupation list? Are you going to raise the level of wages to £40,000 as Suella Braverman wanted to do? Or are you just going to have a cap and say, once we reach this cap every year, no more are coming in? What are your plans? We haven't heard those.
They're still wishy-washy.
And one of her colleagues suggested at the weekend, Darren Jones, I think his name, Shadow Chief Secretary, we're going to get it to 200,000. That just dropped out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And not a...
Just pick a figure.
Yeah, and no explanation of how he was going to do that.
Yeah.
Great if he could... If
it would be excellent for people living here and wanting access to public services, yes.
I was in Ireland for a few days last week. It's a big issue in Ireland too, isn't it, immigration? Big issue. You could feel the tension on the streets. It's
a huge issue, and of course we had the riots in Dublin last week, and they were dismissed as being far right, and undoubtedly there are people in those communities trying to whip up bad behaviour and rioting and what have you. But there is a concern, Andrew, and I think it's wrong to ignore that concern, that there are a lot of people coming into Ireland, in Dublin and in rural areas as well, and they are changing the face of Ireland, as it were. And people are concerned about that, and I think it's right that that should be talked about. But in Dublin, you can't talk about it, because if you do, then...
You're a horrible racist.
You're a horrible racist.
Yeah, well, we're horrible racists if we talk about it here too, of course.
Yeah, well, we talk about everything here. There's no topic to discuss. Arlene, thank you so much.
Great to see you.